We are going to start our last section of these 2 days deep discussion on personalized medicine, and give words to Professor Jennifer Reardon. Thank you very much.
Okay, first of all, I just want to thank Michael and Margarita very much for organizing this wonderful meeting, and for the Pontifical Academy of Sciences for bringing us together. I think, as I've said already, I think it's really important that we have these spaces, and I'm really pleased that the Academy has taken an interest in these issues. I think the other thing that you might have learned about me is that I like to, maybe we can leave one of the lights on just so it's a little less dark. Is that, yeah, that's good, right there. Sorry, sensitive to lighting. Personalized lighting, yeah. So you've learned from me that I like to ask large questions. I wrote a book that was inspired by Hannah Arendt, partly by Hannah Arendt, and I will begin with a large issue and this quote that I very much like from Arendt. We do not yet know whether this situation is final, but it could be that we will forever be unable to understand, that is, to think and speak about the things which nevertheless we are able to do. And I'll come back to aspects of this, but Arendt is writing this in the beginning of the human condition. She's actually worried about the rise of mathematics, the rise of logical thinking and the natural sciences, so it's actually specifically related back to precision medicine. So the large question I want to ask in my talk today is, what is the route between the technological ingenuity that brings us the ever-expanding and exponentially growing genomic and other omic data that is at the heart of the promised personalized medicine, and meaningful knowledge that might foster life and human understanding? So what's the link between the data and the knowledge? The question of meaning, the question of the uses, significance, and value of the human genome is at the heart of what I've been calling the post-genomic conditions, the book that I referred to. And this is what sequence actually looks like. This is genomics 10x sequencing. There are 750 million bits of data on this image you see there. Every dot is 50 nucleotides. How do we make sense of that? This is what it looks like. What does it mean? So while efforts to forge answers to important questions about privacy, property, consent will continue to be important to advancing personalized medicine, my contention is that the field will not make meaningful progress unless it grapples with the fundamental questions about value and worth that were created in the wake of the human genome sequence. So I argue that the Human Genome Project created a problem of meaning by creating the technologies that gave us AAC, GC, AAT, but did not build in the apparatus for interpreting it. We can sequence all those A, Cs, Gs, and Ts, but what do they mean? While the genome was described as the secret of life, will it actually lead to important biological knowledge? And I think that is a question that, in fact, these two books do raise these questions in various ways. Barbara Prainsack, in her book on personalized medicine, there's a wonderful chapter when she talks about how, as we digitize images, it means that how that information gets transferred. You used to look at brain scans and the imaging with the doctor and the imager together in the same room. Now you can send it over the computer. You don't necessarily have those people together sharing tacit knowledge about the patient. So some information actually gets lost in that. In the Hallam Stevens and Sarah Richardson's or their image there, you can see the circle graph, which is how genomics has moved to a circle because it allows more information to be put on the graph as opposed to a line. But as Hallam Stevens relates in this, is that just a hairball, like it's a bunch of data, but this is actually a term that information scientists use. So it is the genome. I think that we need to start with more basic questions. What is biology? And is genomics properly a part of biology? Is it, genomics and personalized medicine, an important thing around which we should gather? And I want to note that the etymology of the word thing, as the science and technology studies scholar Bruno Latour reminds us, the word thing derives from the Old English word ding, which means a meeting or an assembly. So a thing or a gathering arises around a matter of concern. So should the genome, should personalized medicine be a thing in this world? Is it a matter of our concern, or should it be? In an age of historic inequalities, dwindling natural resources, and growing polarization, what should be a thing around which we gather? Should it be a genome? Should it be personalized medicine? How can we constitute the collectives, the we's, that can credibly answer these fundamental questions about what ought to exist and who we are, questions that are at the heart of collective life and justice? Now, I'm, of course, not the first person to raise these questions about meaning and how it relates to genetics and genomics, nor is it surprising that I would. My father was a Jesuit priest, as I've relayed to some of you. He was one of the Washington, D.C. Catholic priests known as the Washington Dissidents, disciplined by Cardinal Boyle for opposing John Paul VI's teachings on birth control and in Humanae Vitae. Many of you will know the 1968 encyclical that came up. And interestingly, this article, as it's framed, this is a big deal in the Catholic Church at the time, in Catholicism at the time. It was about authority and who had authority. Here you have American democracy posed against Rome's authority, as this is in the Washington Post, which covered this episode. So I grew up hearing from my father. Of course, birth control was one of the first biotechnologies. So I grew up hearing from my father about these debates about how to interpret the meaning of birth control and other biotechnologies in the light of theology. It is from my father that I also learned of the work of Father Robert Brungs. He was one of the co-founders. He's also a Jesuit. My father was a Jesuit too. He was one of the co-founders of the Institute for the Theological Encounter with Science and Technology, which still exists today. It's out of St. Louis University. And this organization, as you can read up there, our motto is, do not be afraid. Don't be afraid of science. Religion and science can work together. So it's because of my father that I'm in possession of this book, which are the proceedings of a meeting that ITES, this organization, held in 1996 on the patenting of biological entities. Now, while remarkably we have not talked that much about ownership or property at this meeting, at this workshop 20 years ago, of course, this was the main topic of concern. Jeremy Rifkin had just called for a ban on patenting life, and many church leaders had joined him. Brungs, however, questioned whether patenting should actually be the main matter of concern. Indeed, he questioned the utility of any kind of line drawing between ethical and unethical use and abuse, as he explained. Are we certain that lines should be drawn where we would at present draw them? The problem we face is not ethical. It is ontological, if I may use that word. Our issues and challenges are at the level of meaning. Ethical discourse is necessary, but it is in no way sufficient. He went on to cite a portion of the civil engineer Harry Boardman's address delivered in 1976 to the American Advancement for the Association of Science, the Association for the American Advancement of Science, but Boardman stated, far too pervasively, these endless biomedical science value discussions manifest a deplorable blindness which seems to proceed from a hypnotic fascination with appliances and appliance makers. You may be familiar with this idea that ethicists deal with the applications of science and technology, and the scientists deal with the production of it. So his argument is that that kind of fascination with the appliance is a problem. The central concern is not science or scientists, but with the whole of knowledge, its benefits, the price it extracts, and its special province, that of ideas. And as you've been hearing me say, my concern is with knowledge. In other words, Brungs explains, Boardman is calling for less attention to techniques and to issues like patenting, and more concern about the meaning of these new powers. I would argue, similar to Brungs and Boardman, that to address questions of meaning, we must turn our attention to fundamental questions about the constitution of knowledge and questions that are inextricably bound up with questions of justice. Yet it is here that Brungs and I depart. Although I think the departure actually will be illuminating and will speak to my main point. Brungs, as a Jesuit, was interested in understanding what bioengineering, quote, looked like in the light of the revelation and of the future of the kingdom of God, unquote. I am interested in what it looks like in the light of justice. This makes me undoubtedly a product of my times and of genomics. As John Rawls pointed out in his enormously influential theory of justice, justice brings us back to first principles and virtues. Now, we live in times where people across the globe are asking us to return to first principles of institutions. Whether it is the right to concentrate wealth on Wall Street, whether the freedom of movement should be fundamental to a free Europe, whether a union between a man and a woman is fundamental to the institution of marriage, countless issues asking us to decide what are the first virtues around which we collectively live, and who are we? Rawls argues that no matter how efficient or well-ordered the laws may be, if they are unjust, they must be redone. At the end of the last millennium, the human genome sequence became an emblem of one just struggle for justice. It promised to be a part of the fall of the Cold War and to unite the world. The first principle of our collective living is that we're not divided. One genome, one people. And this idea really comes after World War II, when geneticists really, that's when they're arguing no race, or if there is race, in fact, they weren't saying no race, but we're all mixed up. And this is an image that UNESCO produced. This is what originally attracted me to genomics, was that potential that it could bring us together, that it's linked to justice. Now, of course, I quickly relearned the reality on the ground. I was no romantic any longer. I was going to be a graduate student working on the Human Genome Diversity Project, and any of you know about the Human Genome Diversity Project will know that it was accused of being racist and biocolonialist. My life would have been entirely different had I been a scientist who, in their first part of their career, worked on a project that was labeled racist and biocolonialist. And I often say, no scientist, or very few I know, go into science to create the next generation of racism. So how do we do it differently? At the very same time, right at the height of the Human Genome Project, genomics also became an emblem of public, open science. Leaders of the effort, as you see here, to sequence the Human Genome Project, the public effort, leaders of the public effort to sequence the Human Genome Project fought off efforts to patent the human genome. So it was framed as the evil Craig Venter, who you see with less hair, versus Francis Collins with more hair. It was an epic fight of the good or the public Human Genome Project against the evil, privately funded Craig Venter, or so the story was told. Jeremy Rifkin and the Protestants and the Buddhists and indeed some Catholics came to their side. However, Brungs did not. Instead, he organized this iTest meeting to question the emerging moral consensus that the patenting of life was wrong. Now, at the same time, Merck decided to fund the work of Bob Waterston, who's pictured here. Waterston's lab was one of the two main labs that produced the final sequence of the human genome. The other was John Sulston's lab, pictured here, at the Sanger in the UK. Waterston and Sanger both were deeply committed to keeping the sequence in the public domain. Merck also sought to keep the human genome data in the open and supported their efforts. Brungs, who at the time was at St. Louis University, invited Waterston, who at the time was at the neighboring Washington University in St. Louis, to attend the meeting. And at the meeting, Waterston said he'd rather not speculate about why Merck was supporting him. There he is. Quotes Waterston, this is at the meeting. Merck came to us because they had made the corporate decision that they wanted to sponsor a project that would put on the web human DNA sequence of the same kind that Insight and Human Genome Sciences were producing. They wanted to sponsor projects with equivalent information out in the public domain. The reasons they wanted to do this, they never told us. I can only speculate, and I would rather not. I think it's basically that they wanted to level the playing field. Now, the fact of Merck's support was tricky. Obviously, it blurred the bright lines some in the Human Genome Project were trying to draw between the evil corporate world and the good public one. Yet it made Sprung's point: simple line drawing between private and public, good and evil, will not work. If the situation was murky back in 1996, it's only gotten murkier since. Genomics is no longer primarily supported by public institutions, and neither is the personalized medicine that it gave rise to. Rather, it is fueled by large investments made by private philanthropists, venture capitalists, startups, and major pharmaceutical companies. Turning a profit has become a prime concern, if not a responsibility, of many, including at my own university, Atul Butte, who's the chief data scientist of UC Health, who puts a slide up every time he gives a talk saying, I'm a member of 50-some companies, I started 3 companies, if you're not similar, you don't matter. So very different from 20 years ago when it was a mark against you. Today it's a badge of honor to have these links. How to align genomics with the cause of justice under these conditions is far from clear and has made the problem of the meaning of genomics even messier and the problems of trust even more difficult to address. Before you had God and the churches clearly on one side and corporations on the other. It's not like that anymore. Genomics has helped to create a world in which data may be accessible, but medical treatments, as we've been talking about over and over today, resulting from it may not. I'll just put up the one example I have from Spark. I've been involved in some of the discussions about this with Luxturna. They've put out a new gene therapy that's cost nearly $1 million. So, of course, we've talked about this. These extraordinary price tags are putting strains on governments. They're making it difficult to get access to these. All the medicines coming out of, as far as I know, a colleague of mine looked into this, coming out of personalized medicine, the most expensive medicines we've ever seen. Whatever we want to say about that, that's what's happening. In the wake of the completion of the human genome sequence, today, worries that investments in genomics might aggravate inequalities in healthcare are a defining concern. Where I live in San Francisco, residents recently asked leaders of the University of California, San Francisco, how they could invest so much money in the new Mission Bay campus. I don't know how many of you have been to San Francisco lately, but this is an astounding buildup of buildings, beautiful buildings, built by Starchitects. Actually, an interesting point here, you're not looking at biomedical buildings here, you're looking at the new headquarters of Uber and the basketball stadium that the head of the 4th largest computer software company in the world, Mark Benioff, had built in San Francisco, making it actually difficult for biotech to move in around UC San Francisco because the property values are now so high. This is the world we live in. And that genomics has not played an insignificant role, and personalized medicine has not. This campus is devoted to the launch of precision medicine. Okay, so in the wake of all this investment, where billionaires, some of you may know this guy, Sanford Wheel, shatterer of the Glass-Steagall Act, he funded this building, the neurosciences building, to a tune of, he gave the largest gift ever to UC San Francisco. If you have this kind of money, you can decide, you can put up a building, you can decide what's in the building, and reportedly you can even try to define who gets hired. There's been pushback against this. There's a big issue at universities right now. Some people saying universities ought to have constitutions. How do we have people with this much money having this much power? These are the issues. These are the deeper issues, the fundamental questions of justice. What are the first principles, the first virtues around which a university ought to be built? These new and in the midst of that, UC San Francisco said it was going to close this, the last remaining reproductive health clinic serving poor Black and Latino youth in San Francisco. As a petition posted to thecolorofchange.org put it, The message the city of San Francisco and the university are sending is blatant: money matters, not black and brown lives. This is the conversation in San Francisco at the moment. I hear it actually when I go to my local gym. This is very visible. These new bioeconomies today being built in the Bay Area, transforming a visit to a UCSF doctor into or turning it into a contractual transaction. At a routine physical checkup in 2013, I received these tacos, as they call them, terms and conditions form, which informed me that my reception of medical care was dependent on me agreeing that UCSF could share my data and tissues with researchers, and I possessed no rights to any useful commercial products that resulted, of course. When I asked my doctors what they might do with my data and tissues, the first thing they mentioned was genomic research. When I published an account of this encounter, encouraged by colleagues in the San Francisco Chronicle, I heard from others who said they were in fights with their medical providers over this very issue. One had a rare disease and did not want their information disclosed because of insurance concerns. Struggles like these are further eroding trust in doctors and medical systems and raising questions about ultimate ends and goals, or to refer back to roles, first virtues. Who is the system for? Me or researchers, me or industry? While market forces and contractual arrangements today powerfully combine to produce access to the tissues and data needed to propel the personalized medicine revolution, they do so at the risk of aggravating already existing problems of trust that may ultimately contravene the field's promises of health and wealth. Consider the proposed clinical trials that are getting going right now using CRISPR to treat sickle cell. After years of historically, this was the first molecular disease, but we still have no new great treatments for sickle cell, and it has been largely ignored. It primarily affects African Americans. Sickle cell trait affects 1 in 13 African Americans, and it has been ignored for the last 50 years. But now the spotlight is on sickle cell. This is because it is a disease that targets a specific cell type, blood, and so it's considered ideal for CRISPR gene therapy. However, will researchers be able to recruit enough people to sign up for the trial? Historic and ongoing mistrust, which also affects all of us, although the goal is to get oversampled, they are not reaching those targets at this moment, as far as I understand. Historic and ongoing mistrust of the biomedical research community, mistrust partially created by legacies of eugenics and sterilization, and also more recent things like sequencing of the HeLa cell line, poses questions about the ultimate meaning and value of advances like CRISPR. Will it help African Americans, for example? It is, I suggest, possible that today we sit on top of a biomedical bubble produced by celebrating technical prowess while sidelining fundamental questions of trust and truth, justice, and knowledge. Under these conditions, the value of genomics and of personalized medicine could collapse under the weight of these mounting concerns. I should say that I think that those in the field are aware of these issues. This is not like you need social scientists and ethicists to enlighten you about this. And indeed, I think many had hoped that after the Human Genome Project, scientists would return to the task of creating meaningful insights about life. However, it soon became clear that advances in sequencing technology would continue to generate the most money and excitement. The premier sequencing project might be over with, the Human Genome Project, but influential thought leaders argued that medical breakthroughs required radically decreasing the cost and increasing the speed of DNA sequencing. NIH invested $230 million of seed money to spur innovation in sequencing. Venture capital and an X Prize followed. DNA sequencing companies became the darling of the tech world. You've heard this already. Costs have gone down dramatically. This was a huge success, beyond Moore's possible imagination. Despite the initial post-Human Genome Project efforts to return focus to fundamental questions of biology and medicine, this startling demonstration of technological powers captured the limelight and VC dollars and created a powerful force that few could resist. And there were also nice meetings on islands. I heard they had fireworks and nice, goodies when you went. Anyway, some prominent genome scientists understood the threat such large sums of money posed to the communal and democratic ethos propounded by the leaders of the Human Genome Project. Indeed, they resolved to fight the forces of capitalist accumulation and to help ensure that the resources that flowed to sequencing did so in a more equitable manner. NIH distributed grant funding to companies who could compete with ABI, so I heard, called arrogant beyond imagination, and break their monopoly. ABI did falter. They produced the machines for the Human Genome Project. ABI did falter. However, the DNA sequencing monopoly did not. Today, one powerful company, again, dominates not Applied Biosystems, but Illumina. In 2015, Illumina was valued at $28 billion and produced more than 90% of all DNA sequence on the planet. In 2017, its share price increased 71%. Today, the company is valued at $46.2 billion and is positioned to grow exponentially. This is because it seeks not just to sequence DNA, but to own the means of interpreting it. A look at the company's homepage provides a link or a glimpse into its aspirations to dominate all aspects of genome sequencing, from forensics to the microbiome to oncology to reproductive health. Capturing platforms for interpretation right now is a big deal. While many hope that in the era after the Human Genome Project, the field would diversify not only the genome sequenced, but also genome sequencers and their interpreters, it is here that we have arrived: a genomics and a future of personalized medicine in which one powerful corporation and its machines might be at the center. The post-genomic condition is a future-oriented now strongly shaped by this past in which the Human Genome Project's effort to create the machines and to sequence took precedence over the effort to interpret that sequence. There was, in fact, a moment in which Craig Venner said, hey, we should stop and do some interpretation. Collins overruled that, said sequence, we'll figure out what it means later. The result, today there exists powerful capacities to sequence and to create all kinds of other information, actually, but not robust institutions that can interpret and responsibly govern. Addressing this critical lacuna will require moving beyond the traditional bounds of bioethics, circumscribed as they are by concerns about privacy, consent, and property, to ask more fundamental questions around what can we gather to create collective life? What principles and practices will engender trust and produce credible knowledge that can guide our decisions? Recall that decision derives from the Latin root cis, meaning to cut or to kill. Not all forms of life or uses of genomic data can be supported. Some live and prosper. Others fail to gain support and die. A judgment, as James was trying to help us to understand, must be made. The question is not whether to judge, but how. As Arendt reminds us, there is perhaps no question more fundamental to political life than this one. On what grounds will we judge? Who are we? These are the urgent questions that today all of us, whether we are scientists, head of a corporation, policymaker, ethicist, must be concerned with and must confront if a global financial collapse is not to be followed by a global political collapse and a global scientific collapse. Perhaps it should not surprise that in this moment in which the credibility and authority of so many institutions are in question, from the media to medicine, from the courts to the classroom, genomics has emerged as a new ground, and this new personalized medicine has as a new ground for attempting to order life. As some astute political commentators have observed, biotech, the new personalized medicine, are among the few things left around which nations gather. They still promise to transcend partisan politics and to unite humanity through its offer of miracle cures. Yet recent events should contravene this dangerously simple interpretation. For example, Elizabeth Warren's effort to resolve questions, she's a senator in the United States who was accused of saying she was Native American by Trump and saying she's not Native American. She said, okay, I'm going to take a DNA test. She thought it'd clear it up. Anyone who knew anything about the history of genetics and Native Americans would have never advised her to do this. She got in big trouble with Native Americans in the United States. Leading to articles like this. Instead of clearing things up, I think it revealed our all too limited capacities to understand the scientific and political questions at stake when citizens and their leaders attempt to speak about differences among human beings at the genomic level. In this case, can ancestry be parsed from race? Can locating differences in our genome help to locate our place in society? By treating genomics as the all-powerful secret of life, by granting it too much meaning, we have failed to grasp and respond to its actual meaning on the ground and its role in fundamental activities of ordering nature and society. Thus, today, it's all too easy for extreme views to fill the gap. As a recent set of articles in the New York Times and elsewhere have pointed out, white supremacists have been using genomics to argue for white supremacy. Power to sequence, may have grown, but our ability to respond to that sequence has not. And as a result, I argue we have systematically, over several decades, built an irresponsible, this is the New York Times article, an irresponsible genomics. That is, I'm almost done. That is, a genomics with the power to sequence, but not the power to respond and to speak about these new constitutional powers. The grave consequences of this are now beginning to be felt. How can we respond? And that's what I think we must talk about. First, I'm going to only say two things. First, we must recognize that the genome is quickly becoming itself a powerful institution, and information, digital information, is itself becoming a powerful institution in our society. It is becoming a routinized set of practices and ideas by which we do order ourselves. And second, we must take responsibility for this fact and invest in genomics as a moral, and information as a moral institution with the capacity to reflect upon and speak about its constitutional powers. We must build institutions that enable us to ask and answer fundamental questions. Who lives and dies and how? Or as Brungs provocatively asked, what is our bodied future? We see the body of Christ on the wall. If Jesus were to ascend today, would he bring his bank stem cells with him to heaven? These are not inconsequential questions. Finally, we must work across historic divides. At my own university, you have the Science and Justice Research Center that attempts to train science and engineering graduate students along with social scientists, humanities, and art students to ensure that justice is part of the conversation. While our focus is on training students to make this possible, we have had to learn how to retrain ourselves in new ways. For our natural scientists and engineers, this means recognizing that that reflective work counts as science and is not a distraction from the hard work of the lab. For our social scientists and humanists, it means walking away from assumption that as soon as you introduce a sequencing machine, you might be producing a reductionist, deterministic vision of humanity. We all hope for a future of personalized medicine that achieves its promises, new cures, longer and better lives. However, for that to come to pass, we must begin with the simple task of cultivating meaningful speech among us, where we ask who we are and who we ought to be. Who is not represented around this venerable table today? And whatever we's we can muster, that we must endeavor to speak about that which personalized medicine does today, not the future, and to develop the ability to respond to those actions today. So I'll conclude, a responsible personalized medicine should be our next milestone.